And now we want to welcome all the folks online. For you people here, I just want to highlight this. I did give you this little sheet, which is just an outline. You can kind of work your way through if you want to make little notes on each of the screens that are going to come up. That are going to come up. All right. So where have we been? So this is week 4. Just a little bit of a recap here. We've been through 50 chapters of Genesis. So we've just been in one book in the Bible, but it's a big book and it's an important book. Lots has happened there. Nothing happens, of course, without the creation of the world. And we've kind of worked our way through that. And by the way, take a look, because it doesn't look much better than this. It's a beautiful day of creation. Caitlin then moved us into how God built a nation, starting with Abraham, and then we learned about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. One of my favorite stories actually is Isaac coming to this elderly couple and naming him Laughter. And then we get God's covenant, God's promises that he makes with the Israelites. And we're going to see this, we're going to see how this comes alive today in the study of the Exodus. But God made these promises. There'll be as many Jews as there are the stars in the sky, right? It's going to build a great nation, and that nation is going to receive the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and they will be a people, a nation, and God will be their God, and they will be His people. And so we see how those promises get played out. God keeps His promises. God remembers His covenants. And today, or rather, this last week, Pastor Joel did a lot on Joseph. This is a great, it's so good they made a Broadway musical out of it. But the story of Joseph is really a great story, and we saw, and Joel talked about Joseph's faithfulness. Important. All right. So today, we moved to Deliverance. So this is the 4th chapter in the story. It's the 4th chapter in the story. It's the 2nd book in the Bible. Okay, so we did three chapters on Genesis, and now we've moved into Exodus, the 2nd book of the Bible. And the word Exodus means going out. Okay, so it's a going out, and that's where we get an exit sign, is from same root as the word Exodus. And the going out is the going out of the Israelites, the Jewish people who are in slavery in Egypt, and they're going to go out, and they're moving towards the promised land. It's going to be a while until they get there. But they are in slavery, and God's going to get them out. And just have to say, and I think I will end up saying more of this, but it is, I think it's the most important story in the Old Testament. And I think it would be what the Jewish people would see as the most important story in the Old Testament. So, okay, creation, you got an argument, right? But this is when the Jewish people become a people. And it is God at His greatest and most powerful, and it is what the Jews remember today, right? It is it's their Easter, is Passover, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. Slavery in Egypt. So this is where we start, and I've got some verses up there which we'll kind of work our way through. The Egyptians subjected the Israelites to hard servitude and made their lives bitter with hard servitude in mortar and bricks and every kind of field labor. So they're doing, they're building, they're building big things. They're building pyramids, right? They're doing slave work, and some of that's in the fields too. We think about all these bricks, but they're doing the food. And one of the big things they had them doing was we got this Nile River in this area that has no water. And so they would literally be taking buckets of water out of the Nile and bringing them places, or they're setting up different systems to get that water. They were ruthless. Slavery, right? This is slavery. They were ruthless in all these tasks that they imposed on them. And then something interesting happens. Even though they're under this enormous, terrible bondage, they keep having babies. And there are more and more and more babies. Do you remember what God was going to make of the Jewish people? A great nation. There they are. Even in the slavery, God's doing His work, and they become so prolific that Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born of the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. And so that's what we got. In the New Testament, I think it's in Acts, Luke writes about it, or maybe it's somewhere that Paul does, that says at the start of this, when Joseph goes to Egypt, right? He's the one who brings them there. There's probably about 75 of them at that point. So 75 Jewish people, that's Joseph, his brothers, and the kids, and whatever. And that's how they grow. So it's this brutal, brutal life. And now we're going to kill the firstborn, or any male children. In this case, every male child that's born is going to get killed to prevent it from becoming even more prolific. And let me just say, these pharaohs keep changing over time, right? This is a pharaoh who doesn't remember Joseph, because Joseph was a hero, right? And Joseph was even kind of in charge. That pharaoh's gone, and that's been forgotten. And there they go. So all these male children are being killed, and we go to Moses. Moses is born into that situation, right? Okay? The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. So she wants this, as any mother would, wants the child to survive, right? And by the way, so does God. So does God. So 3 months, you can hide a baby for 3 months, I guess. Probably even that was a pretty good trick, but Moses is growing, getting bigger. So we put him in a basket and we float him out there, and one of Pharaoh's daughters is out there and finds him. And he's a fine, strapping baby, and she, as women do with babies, she falls in love with it, right? And she wants to take care of it. She wants to bring it into their household. And then she's told, well, how about we find a woman who can nurse this baby, right? And we'll bring her into the household too to do that. And so who do they get? They get Moses' mom. This is how God works, right? And here's the best. All of you mothers out there would have loved this. She got paid for it as well. So there we go. Moses goes into the home. He's probably very well educated, right? Because he's in the part of Pharaoh's household. We don't know all the details. Like we don't know a lot about Jesus growing up, but we know we know where he grew up, and it would have been a good life, a very different life than he might have known. It's interesting though, he never forgets who he is. And how did he even know who he is? His mother must have been whispering in his ear, right? Because we don't really know all those details. But he knows he's not an Egyptian, he's a Jew. He knows that. And one day, after he'd grown up, he went out to his people. He saw their forced labor. So he experiences what this brutal slavery is like. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So he knows who his people are, and some of the other people are beating up one of his own. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Okay, so he hasn't forgotten who he is. And he sees this happening, and this sense of righteousness probably overcomes him, right? So what does he do? This, I really hadn't found this before, but when I was reading it today, I find this interesting. He looked this way and that. He doesn't want to get caught. So in legal terms, what we call this is premeditated murder. Right? It is. This gets you life imprisonment. Because it wasn't just, I'm really mad, I'm going to do it. But he looks this way and that. And so Moses is in fact a criminal. But he thinks he's looked this way and that, so he thinks he's okay. And then a little while later, he sees a couple of Jewish guys kind of fighting a little bit, and he goes in there and tries to break it up. And the guy says to him, "Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses realizes he's not safe because he's going to be found out eventually. And so he knows he has to leave, and he goes to a place called Midian. We don't know exactly where Midian is, but it's far enough away so they don't know what's going on in Egypt. He's safe. He's safe there. And one day he's out and about, and they got the well. The well is the center of life in these places, and these women come up and are going to water their flocks. So that apparently in those days that was work that was often done by the women, and these other men and women doing they drive them off, they're hassling them, they're whatever, and Moses, who actually has already killed an Egyptian, he may look kind of threatening. He kind of saves them from the hassle that they are under. He actually waters the flocks for them. They go home, and the dad says, "Well, what? You didn't bring this guy home with you? What are you thinking?" And that sense of hospitality, that's a big part of things in the Middle East. They welcome him there, and Moses agreed to stay with the men. He gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien residing in a foreign land." Right? He's got nowhere. Moses is really nowhere because he's a Jew who grew up in Egypt, and now he's in neither of those places, and so now he's got a family. He's got a home, and now he takes on this job. This is Moses, right? This is like one of the great figures in the Old Testament, and he's just watching sheep someday, and he's out there just kind of wandering around. What does a shepherd think about all day? And that's what he's doing. He's just out there, and he sees this burning bush, Fire, by the way, fire, and we're going to see more fire. Fire is always a sign of God. And he sees this fire, although, things burn up, but this bush didn't burn up. So it's this fire. It's a burning bush, but it's not consumed. So that causes him some curiosity, and he goes towards the bush, and God said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." He said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. A lot going on here. Remove the sandals from your feet. Actually, that's a great sign of respect. It's by the way what Muslims do every time they enter the mosque, right? If you've traveled anywhere, everybody's got to take off their shoes when they walk in, because that's you're in God's presence. And then he identifies who he is, and this goes back to the what Caitlin was talking about, the forming of the nation. And it's a phrase that's often repeated: the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 1, 2, 3. They're the guys. You could go Joseph. I mean, we can go all the way down, but it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's this people who's being formed, the nation that's being formed. And then have this great statement. He hid his face. Actually, throughout the Bible, here's something. I'm just going to say where we're going with this a little bit. We kind of have this sweet, lovey-dovey idea of God, oftentimes. And I'll just tell you, your pastors here at Lord of Life, we sometimes encourage that. God is love. God loves everybody. The grace of God, which passes, which we can't even understand, that loves us no matter what, all that, right? That's a nice God. That's the kind of God I want. But God is more than that. And we're going to see exactly how that works here. The God of the Old Testament here is a very powerful God. And so it was believed that you couldn't look at God. Okay? And the absolute best example of this comes in Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you remember Indiana Jones, that's what he's looking for. He's looking for the Ark of the Covenant, right? And he gets there and he finds it. But Sean Connery has raised him well, and he knows. Go back to the movie. I can't remember the girlfriend. Anybody? Yeah, who is it? No. The character in the movie. But yes, what's that? Yeah. The good-looking girlfriend. Indy knows to do this. He knows to cover his eyes and her eyes. They close their eyes, and I don't remember the bad guys. If you remember what happened to them, they melted. They melted because the Ark of the Covenant it was believed that's where God resided, and they you can't look at it. You can't look at it. I'll just tell another story since you like that one so much. This is later. Now the Ark of the Covenant would live in the tabernacle, and then further actually in the temple. But in the tabernacle, big tent. And there was there was the high priest, the chief priest, and the Ark of the Covenant was kept in one place. Huge curtain would cut off that. Nobody could go in there. Nobody could go in there except once a year. The chief priest could go in. And what he would do is he'd sprinkle. It's called Yom Kippur. We just had it here. It's today. I thought it was always in September, but it's because it changes with the day. No, I know we got Rosh Hashanah, we got Yom Kippur, and I'm not Jewish, so what do I know? But it was today. It is today. Is. Yeah. That's, when that happened, the chief priest would go in and he'd throw some blood on the Ark of the Covenant. It was called the mercy seat. And would do it just once a year, and it could only be him. Okay? And he would light some incense so that would prevent him from having to see it, right? And he'd go in there, and what they would do is they'd put some bells on him, and they'd put a rope around his ankle, okay? And and the rope would go all the way outside the room. And if, in the presence of God, he was shocked dead because of the power, they'd hear him fall, and they'd pull him out. And that's today. Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur was the Day of Atonement, so where they were atoning, the high priest, chief priest, atoning for his sins and for the sins of all the people. God's powerful. That's the point. So, I'm sure it was the blood from some perfect lamb or something. Yeah. Which we're going to have more blood here in a couple minutes too. This is hard enough for me. These are a little out of order here. In fact, I'm just gonna jump. I'm gonna jump a couple ahead here because this is actually so God tells Moses his job, right? And that's going to be the cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Okay? So that's going to be Moses' job. And we'll get back to that in a second, but that's what he's assigned to do. Oops. Backwards, Peter, backwards. Moses says, if I'm going to do that, who are you? Right? Now, he actually knows who he's talking to, but he doesn't know his name. He doesn't know his name. So Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Always in the Old Testament, someone's name is really important. It's actually important in the New Testament too. I'm pretty proud that I'm Peter the Rock, right? Biblical names matter. Abraham becomes the father of nations. Isaac, laughter. All of these different names. God's name's important too, and they've kind of known who God is. I think he's referred to in other parts up till now as what is it here? Almighty Father. Okay, so that was his name, but he's actually got a real name, a more intimate name, a name. And Moses is right. If he doesn't know God's name, who is he, right? Because he's worried about what the Israelites are going to say when he tells them, "Yeah, come with me. We're leaving Egypt here." So when you give someone your name, it gives you some power. And here is the absolute interesting thing. God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. I am who I am. Yeah, I had the note here. God had actually been known as El Shaddai before then. That's who Abraham, Isaac, Jacob knew him as, God Almighty. But now we have this, I am who I am. And by the way, this is so holy. You can look at this if you got your Bibles open. It will be always all. If this name for God is used, it will all be in capitals. It will say Lord, and it'll be capital L, capital O, always capitalized. Many Jews still don't say this name because it's so powerful. So they just won't even speak it. They'll just, if they're reading through it, they'll stop, go to the next word. And if you see it printed, the name is actually Yahweh. And if you see that printed, they might just put the Y ... or God, G ... Again, the holiness, the power of that name. Now, I find this kind of interesting. I am who I am. What does that mean? I'm going to actually talk about it in the sermon this weekend. But I think that God wants them to know I am who you want me to be. I am who I am. God's going to be who God is, right? And we don't always like it. We certainly don't always understand it. But God's here telling them, I'm God, and you're not. And we think we're God often. We play God a lot. And we create gods in the way that we want them. Voltaire said this once, God created us in his image, and ever since then we've returned him the favor. We make gods that fit our needs, and that may not be who God is. You know, some people want a God full of rules and boom, boom, this is the way it is. Or, not me. Some people do. Some people want a God who just forgives everything, doesn't really, you know. Neither of those things are God. Actually, in our Lutheran world, that's what we call the law and the gospel. Some of this is hard. God sometimes has to do hard things, say hard things to us. There is a sense of justice to God. It's not all love and roses. Sometimes it's hard, and then, of course, sometimes it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
You may not know this answer, but you know this hurricane and all the devastation and everything, and I'm thinking, is that the devil or is that God?
Question is hurricane, who do we attribute that to? I do not know that answer. I think I know this, though. I think we're making these hurricanes as bad as they are. I think it's what we've done.
We are.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is what climate change is going to be. The storms get worse. We're going to get more of them. Now, there was hurricanes before there was climate change, but I think there's a sense in which it's us. And much of the, why would God allow Hitler, for example? Well, I liked what Joel said about God has dreams for us more than plans, and sometimes we don't follow it, right? And human beings do bad things, and we blame God for what we do. Not completely in that case. I'm not saying that because, bad things just do happen, and it's one of the great questions that we will have answered someday. Why are you doing some of that? I am who I am, though. God is God. We're not. I did the first one there. God asked Moses to do this absolutely impossible thing, and now Moses said, "My Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." He's making excuses. Moses doesn't want to do it, right? Because it's going to be hard. I'm just glad to be in this room where none of us have ever said that. But he gets Aaron for some help, and he's got some tools to use. So he goes to Pharaoh. I mean, maybe this is just going to work out well. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, so that they may celebrate a festival to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord?" The writer puts in Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that I should listen to him and let Israel go. I do not know your Lord. He just says, yeah, why would I do that, right? He kind of laughs at him. What me worry? Moses was right about this. It's not going to be any easy. So then, can it get any worse to be in slavery? I mean, slavery, that's about as bad as it gets, unless you got some bozo going in and telling Pharaoh what he should do, and so Pharaoh comes down harder on them. Now they got to make as many bricks, but they don't even give them the straw to do it. They have to go out and find the straw. It's terrible, and the Jews, the Israelites, they don't want Moses to do it, right? Yeah, thanks for the help. We'll do this. We'll do this on our own. So you can see kind of there how it got worse. I'm not going to read through that. But God says, don't worry. This is a great one. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. Indeed, by a mighty hand he will let them go. By a mighty hand he will drive them out of his land. You will see what I can do." And what does he do? We kind of all know these things. I'm just going to give you 1 minute here. Turn to somebody next to you. Which of these are the first 9 plagues. Which do you think would be the worst? Okay, you got 1 minute. Ty, you got to all declare. All right, all right. Any consensus here? Do you think which? I got to say I hate biting flies. That's where I'm going. Yeah, they're all like frogs everywhere. Here's an interesting thing about these plagues. So at the time, there was a god. It's called polytheism. There were all kinds of gods, right? So you actually had a god of the Nile. The Nile was turned to blood. And so, well, the god of the Nile must have done that. I mean, you got a god for the frogs. You got a god for the light and day, night and darkness. You had different gods who controlled these different things. Here's what our God's doing with this. One of the things he's doing. I control all these things. I control them all. You need 9 gods to do this. We got one God, and he does everything. This is the movement away from polytheism, many gods of just different things, to monotheism. And it is a huge move. One God. Yahweh is his name, and he is our God. Don't be looking at all these other ones. Interestingly, here, the thing. I mean, all of these. The whole thing's amazing, but the one they never saw in Egypt was hail. Hail doesn't happen, so that was kind of the most head scratcher to them, because other of these are kind of they are just some natural disasters, things that can happen. And by the way, of these, supposedly, locusts was the worst. And we know, actually, swarms of locusts we've had here, it happens in places. Everything goes, everything's eaten. There's nothing to eat. There's no, they're all bad. Now, Pharaoh, what he would do is sometimes he'd say, yeah, okay, that's not so bad. I don't care. And sometimes he'd say to Moses, okay, we're done. You can go. And then he'd quickly change his mind. We have this interesting phrase here that God hardened his heart. So I got some trouble with that, right? That's not really fair. If God's making me do a bad thing, is that a bad thing? But really, I think that's the writer saying that. I don't think this is morally, it's not moral determinism where Pharaoh has to do that. I think it's more like, something bad happens and you just get stubborn. And I'm not, even though you know what you're doing's wrong, right? We do this too. I'm gonna dig my heels in. I'm not gonna change. And I think that's what Pharaoh is doing here. And then we have the Passover. And this is actually, I'm going to hold that for a second. So the Passover comes, and I think we kind of know what it is. God has Moses tell all the people, get a lamb, a 1-year-old lamb, a perfect lamb, butcher it, take the blood, put it on the door, and this angel of death is going to come and kill all the firstborn sons in every family, from the Pharaoh's family down to the servants' families. They're all going to die. Unless this blood's on the door, then the angel will know that these are God's people, and they will be protected. And here's one where you say, don't like this God. And I can't say that I really understand it. We do know how terrible slavery is, right? Because we've had a taste of that, obviously, in our country. We only know it from the history books, but sometimes it takes something. Well, in the United States, it took a civil war, the deadliest war in American history, to stop slavery, because that's all it was about. It was slavery. Yeah, and that had to happen for slavery to be overturned. So it may be, but man, I think we all struggle with this thing that happened. But it did happen, and now Pharaoh says, yeah. No, and actually it says in Exodus, all the leaders now. And they're not just going to let Pharaoh decide this one, because they're all going to say, get out of here, go. And so they got orders. Let me just do this one though. This day shall be Passover. This day shall be a remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. So God wants them to remember this day forever and ever, and the Jews do. They have the Passover meal each year. It is actually connected to Easter, and it is the equivalent of their Easter. This is what our God delivered us from. We would say this is what Jesus delivered us from. It's a similar thing. Passover is the remembrance of it. Passover also makes them a more unified people, because now we got something to do that we're all going to do. What does it identify them as? Jews. It's something that Jews do. You're not just going to assimilate into these other cultures and forget who you are. This Passover meal is going to remind you who you are. So then we have the Exodus. Thus says the Lord, saved Israel that day from the Egyptians, and saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, L-O-R-D, capitals, and believed in the Lord and in the servant Moses. So God takes them. They go out. Interestingly, they followed during the day. It was a pillar of clouds. they followed because they have to get to this place they're going. Pillar of clouds, then at night it was a pillar of fire, a sign of God. But God doesn't take them the way that might make more sense because he's worried about the Philistines. They might get in a war there. They got nothing, right? They're leaving from slavery. They got the clothes on their back. Takes them to this spot, though, and now here they are, and there's water over here, and Pharaoh changes his mind, right? And so here come all the best chariots and horses and warriors of Egypt. They're chasing them down because once again, Pharaoh changed his mind. There they are, and here the Israelites sit in this very vulnerable position. And the Israelites say to Moses, yeah, why can't we just go home? Why did you do this? We're going to all be slaughtered now. Thanks a lot, right? Not a people of faith. And of course Moses raises his hand, and the water parts. They walk out. They walk to the other side. Pharaoh's army, all the chariots, all the men, all the power, and the water goes back in, and they're all drowned. They're all drowned. And the Israelites are looking at that, and they say, whoa, this is a God. One of the reasons all this had to happen is because they had to, God knew that something so extraordinary had to happen for them to believe in him. If you're going to build a nation, if you're going to create this trust and faith, something has to happen. And that's what it was. God did it all so that they could know that he was their God and they were his people. And so now, these covenants, right? Now we're not at the promised land, but we got a great nation. I mean, it's going to become greater, but we got this great nation, this great number of people from 75 to who knows how many thousands. That's somewhat in dispute. After 400 years of slavery in Egypt, God just pulls them out in a day. There they go. And so now he's created a great nation, and they're headed towards that promised land. Let me just say a word about, and Caitlin will be bringing you there. But 3 days later, they got no water. And the whole congregations of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if we only had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where we sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. This is one of the great acts of deliverance in the history of the world. And 3 days later, they're complaining, right? I hope you've never done that. The baby is born, the gift you've always wanted. God, why can't I sleep? It's how we are. And of course, God provides them with water. We get the story of manna, the quail. I think this manna thing, just as a last, and this is not the high point of the story, but it's pretty good. God gives them enough, just what they needed for that day. And there's a sense in which having too much hurts us, right? So we have this phrase now, affluenza. People who have so much that it can make you sick. If you have too much to eat, too much to consume, too much, too much stuff, even just organizing our stuff. God says, here, you're going to have plenty. And by the way, this is the other thing. Trust me. Trust me. That manna will be there tomorrow. You'll be just fine. Next week, you're going to find new commands rather than a new covenant. 10 Commandments. Caitlin's got a great one there for you. Any quick questions? Thanks for coming.